You're tuned in to the Brand Ambassador Select Podcast.
Welcome back to the Brand Ambassador Select Podcast, where we are showcasing the coolest brands and gifts, along with featuring movers and makers. I'm your host, Lenore, and this episode is brought to you by Refining Clean, a unique hand sanitizer by Health Fairs Direct. You won't find a better pedigree of hand sanitizer anywhere else. So on this episode, we're going to highlight some of our favorite author guests from this past year. So Steve Snyder, Shoilee Banerjee, David Richards, Jake Brown, and L.H. Draken were some of our favorite authors that we've had on the show. So we hope you enjoyed this little highlight reel. So first, we're going to go back to episode 29. That's where Steve Snyder shared why his World War II novel, Shot Down, is a must-read. Now, what really sparked your curiosity into digging into the history of World War II and your father's experiences?
Well, I've always been interested in World War II since I was a little kid, and growing up, I knew the basics of my dad's World War II history. But it wasn't until I retired in 2009 that I had the time to really delve into his history in more detail. At that time, I had no intention of writing a book. But the more I learned, the more fascinated I became. And 3 years into my research, I just came to the conclusion that the story of my dad and his crew was so unique and so compelling that it needed to be told. People needed to know about it. And so I decided to write a book.
How did you start your research? Did your dad leave stuff behind for you, or did you have to kind of like do a little crime thing and match everything up?
Well, my parents had kept a lot of material from the war years, and there were two items that were really significant. One was a diary that my dad wrote while he was missing in action about his plane being shot down. That's absolutely riveting, which is I put in the book. And the other were all the letters that my dad wrote to my mother while he was stationed in Europe before he got shot down. And my dad was really candid in those letters. He went into detail about what bombing missions were like, what life was like on the air base, what life was like in England and London at the time, escapades of him and his crew. And reading those are just fascinating. And that just put me on a journey that didn't stop. I started reading book after book about the air war over Europe. I went on the internet and spent countless hours downloading declassified military documents. I went on a quest to find relatives of all my dad's crew. B-17 had a 10-man crew, and asking them for any information, pictures, articles, newspaper clippings, letters that they could send to me. So it was an exhaustive research, but I probably wouldn't have written the book if it wasn't for two Belgian gentlemen who were young boys during the war and greatly affected by it. And later in life, they became local historians, and they interviewed all these Belgian people and members of the Belgian underground about events that took place involving my dad and his crew. And they documented their testimony, and they gave me unbelievably detailed information that would have been lost forever without their dedicated research. So I owe them a huge debt.
More on Steve Snyder, you can head to stevesnyderauthor.com. On to episode 16, I believe. That is when young adult author and activist Shoilee Banerjee shares how her book, Something, addresses mental health.
I've always loved writing, and it's always been one of my greatest passions. I have written poems, stories ever since I was really young. I would participate in poetry competitions and writing competitions. And I actually wrote my first book when I was 9 years old. It was about a dragon and his adventures. And no, it wasn't the best, but we're here for the character development. And I continued my writing throughout my life until I reached high school. And that's when things really started to shift in the culture and environment. There was more stress and pressure to be perfect all the time. And some of my friends were dealing with mental health issues, like they were having problems at home, or they were having a tough time with school and performance. And so I thought I could do what I knew best, which was writing, and I could bring light to the issue. And I decided to write a book about all of these happenings and based on people's experiences with mental health.
Because not everybody's gonna love you. Like, I hate to say that, but it's true. You know, you're not gonna please everybody on this face of the earth. And that's something that we have to, be okay with.
Yeah, definitely. And And I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because that's actually something that my main character struggles with a lot. It's this burden of trying to be perfect all the time and getting everyone to like her. And that is really hard. You have to be able to have confidence in yourself and trust yourself and invest in yourself. So yeah.
And I would say that would be the advice you'd give to other teens right now who are currently struggling with mental health?
Yeah, I would say that's a huge part of it. I would say that, first of all, it's okay to not be okay. And what does that mean? That means that you don't have to be perfect all the time. You don't have to be always happy. The whole point of the human experience is that we experience emotion, and we are human beings and not robots. And we should be able to normalize that we have other feelings like sadness and anxieties and whatnot. But you should know when something isn't like you, when something is off. And if you are feeling sad for a long time, I think you should really know when to seek help, and that there's no shame in it. And I think that all humans do experience these emotions, and it's normal that we do. But yeah, when you notice that something is off with yourself, please do seek help.
More on Shoilee and to grab a copy of her book, Something, you can head to ShoileeBanerjee.com. One of our first authors we had on the podcast was David Richards. So this was episode 9. We're going back to literally one of the first episodes we've ever done. So he shared how he found himself through writing his book, The Lighthouse Keeper.
Yeah, so The Lighthouse Keeper is really my story. It's the story of a young man who leaves home because he doesn't want to continue the family business, and he decides to go to be a lighthouse keeper because I think it will offer him adventure and excitement. And it's not what he expects. The lighthouse keeper himself is a strange old man, but through his work there, Sam, the main character, actually goes on a journey where the only way he can survive the journey is to master his mind. And so he goes on kind of different seas within his mind. And the idea is just simply that your ocean is a mind where all your memories are, all your recollections are, and then your awareness, so where you place your awareness, is a lighthouse. And so he has to learn how to be his own lighthouse keeper.
More on David and to check out his books, you can head to davidrichardsauthor.com. Now, on to one of my personal favorite guests and authors that we've had on the show. Episode 39 is Jake Brown. He is an award-winning music biographer, and he stopped by to chat about his latest book, Behind the Boards Nashville. So congratulations, you literally hit a huge milestone, your 50th book, yay!
In 20 years, yeah, I moved here in 2003 with 2 books published, and this summer hit 50, so Nashville's been very good to me. I specialize in books that either are a memoir or focus on the behind the scenes of the record business, be it the writing and recording and the songwriting, business side of it. The producers are maybe the most underappreciated, if not the songwriter within country. If you look at a music video in country, say pop doesn't do it, rock doesn't do it, hip hop, you'll see, if you remember MTV when they still showed videos, it would say artist, song, label, maybe director, and then it would say songwriter. And that piqued my interest about 10 years ago to start the National Songwriter Series. That has third book's coming out now. There's 90 songwriters doing the 3, but nobody really realizes there's these 2 column streets called Music Row in Nashville, where in houses, in some buildings, in music publishing houses, these songwriters sit all day and write the songs that many of country music's biggest stars make famous.
Yep.
In the course of that series, I was interviewing people that were more of the traditional model, as well as some that are what you would call track guys, which is to say they are multi-instrumentalists. Amazingly, used to be that you would bring a session band in. Now they still work fast. They knock out 3-4 hits in an afternoon, whereas like a rock band's getting drum sounds in that afternoon. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's really quick.
Yeah, well, even quicker, guys, and I'll just rattle off a few. Joey Moy, who does Florida Georgia Line, Krista Stefano does Carrie Underwood, Zach Crowley does Sam Hunt, Jody Stevens that helps produce Luke Bryan, etc. It goes on and on. Russ Copperman, who does Dierks Bentley. These guys not only can write songs, but they also produce them in their laptops, quite literally in their Pro Tools rigs. They can play the guitars, they can play the bass, the keyboards, the drums. So by the time they come out of that demo session, they have what a lot of times you hear on the radio, but for a bit of mixing polish. And I thought, wow, that would be interesting to then focus on the country producer side. And from there, because Shane McNally, so from there I had those guys. I started reaching out to others, and before we knew it, we had 30. And everyone is in this book. It's the definitive country music anthology. And it takes fans back to their own personal stories, how they discovered a lot of the happy accidents of Nashville. People come here to be a star. They don't quite make it as a star, but they become a songwriter. That makes them a number one and gives them their career, or they become a producer. There was also a pedigree of people in this book, like Paul Worley, like the great Dan Huff, my God, played on Top Gun soundtrack and Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson. He started out a guitar player. These guys learn from behind the other side of the board, you would say, out in the live room. And then they kind of, from the best of the best over the years, Jimmy Bowens and Barry Beckett's and all of these great guys in the 80s, Jim Ed Norman, who's in this book, Norbert Putnam, who did Margaritaville. He was Elvis Presley's bass player before he became a producer. So it gives you an example of how these guys really learned the business from the player side. And then it gives them, when they became producers in their own right, there's so much of a more fluid communication and translation because they, as musicians, can speak to the musicians or the artists. Mm-hmm. I find with these series that, and I've done, I have in the studio, which I write with, I've done them with Heart, with Motorhead, with Tupac Shakur Estate, Rick Rubin, all across the map. These are an example to take fans inside the making of these albums and interview the band members and the producers and the principals. Ann and Nancy Wilson from Heart, I did one with, example like that, where the fan gets to go inside the studio and sit there behind the console, similar to this book, and feel like they're right there in the recreation of how these albums were made. So if you're a country fan and you can't see live shows, but you are still wanting to sort of get more of an up-close personal sort of rapport with that artist, this book hopefully will help you do that.
More on Jake Brown, you can head to jakebrownbooks.com. Now on to the last author we're going to highlight on this episode is LH Draken. On episode 31, she shares how she went from a crime writer to a children's author. Now her book, The Year of the Rabid Dragon and The Art of War, Little Boo Illustrates. So the book that you're referring to, that is The Year of the Rabid Dragon, right?
Right, that's the crime thriller, yeah.
And that's, you were living in Beijing and all that culture really inspired that book, correct?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, I've always thought writing was interesting, of course, since we were talked about, but at different periods I've had different ideas for different books, and then all of a sudden we've been living in Beijing, and then I had some time off because my son had just been born, and this story for like a crime thriller, medical mystery, crazy scientists, vengeful government functionaries, like all this stuff starts coming at me because you're living there in this story. You feel like Beijing lends itself to crime thriller stories. And yeah, that's how community is constantly in flux. And you just get tired, you just want a little bit of stability. And then my husband's job actually got an offer to come back to Munich. And so we took that and brought our family home. And now we've been here for a couple of years, and I almost am starting to feel like, is it predictable? Like I'm a little bit like, I don't know, like, is it time to do something else? Because every day you walk down the street, you know exactly what you'll see, and you see the same neighbors you always see, and you see the same bakery doing the same thing, the same time every single day, and the tram is always on time, and the trains are on time, and like it's fantastic. It's beautiful and clean and orderly and tidy. And then after a while, you're like, oh, it's, the other side is it's boring.
So you, after you had your second son, you ended up creating another book, the Art of War, Little Boo Boo Illustrates, the Art of War, which is a curation of quotes and aphorisms from Sun Tzu's famous text of military strategy. Tell us a little bit more about the original text and why you chose to adapt this particular story into a children's book.
Yeah, so Sun Tzu's Art of War is like 2,500 years old. So it's one of the oldest books on military strategy that we've ever found or uncovered. I mean, if there were earlier ones, they've not survived. And what's amazing though is that this book that's 2,500 years old is still read and put on like the commander's list of military strategy in Marine Corps training, and it was read by Napoleon Bonaparte, and it's read by all the great strategists, but it's also read by people nowadays like adapting it to business strategy and the Art of War for art, or there's all these different like adaptations that have been made out of it because it's a text that lends itself to some of the more basic like descriptions of how life works. And I think what's so interesting is it's an old text. It was written when it was originally written, it was kind of this secretive like treatise that was only available to the emperors and the most elite ruling powers that were. But now we have access to some of these ideas, and they're so applicable, because what is war but how to adapt to an uncertain situation? What is he talking about except for how to handle controversy and the surprise element of life and the things that we don't understand or the things that we can't predict, and how to prepare ourselves properly for that, and how to prepare ourselves for things that we are not prepared, like are not expecting. And so the reason that I chose this text though to adapt was I had just had my second son, and some people had sent me, people send you gifts when you have your first son, but sometimes for your second kid, they're like, oh, you have all the stuff you need, but we want to do something. So you choose something you like, do something nice with the money. And so I decided that I would take a little bit of this money that people got me and put it into a book that I could dedicate to my son. And the reason I chose The Art of War was because I felt like, as a parent, of course you have to feed and clothe and take care of your child. But you can't just, you could do that. A robot could do that. You could have like a system to do basic stuff. But the reason that parents are so important is because this journey from becoming a child into an adult is a journey of preparing yourself to face the unexpected, to slay the dragons that will come down your path, to not keep you safe, but prepare you to fight in a world of the unexpected, to be prepared to be an adult. And so I felt like this was kind of a cool way to adapt an ancient text to how do we become adults? How do we become mature citizens of the world? And how do we face the things that the controversy of life?
More on LH Draken, you can check out lhdraken.com. Now, those were some of our favorite author guests of 2020, and we're looking forward to hearing from more authors and their stories in 2021. So that's a wrap on another episode of the Brand Ambassador Select Podcast. I'm your host, Lenore. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss one. More at brandambassadorselect.com, and we will see you in the new year.